Hi, I'm Gray Cook. Welcome to the Reebok University Pro Series. What we're going to do now is look at some core board exercises. Hopefully what you've done is looked at the movement screening, CD-ROM, and video. You understand the 7 movement patterns, and that's very important because what we're going to do is use the core board to address the movement pattern problems. Now hopefully you've seen the core board, you realize how versatile it is, you can stand on it and do many things, but I want to show you some low-level stuff that really stimulates motor learning. It makes you use flexibility that you may gain through a stretching program or core stability that you gain through doing a floor routine. And on the reactive surface of the core board, it actually stimulates you to have even better dynamic reflexes. It's very important that you understand that because we're going to be using the core board first off as a remedy and then as a conditioning tool. Now, we know how the core works, at least on one level. We know that EMG activity tells us the transverse abdominis kicks in first. The internal-external obliques sort of stabilize the core, and then the multifidus stabilizes the lumbar spine. The thing that we don't really do or incorporate into our training is this is reflex. This is not something you think about. Sure, you can make your abs fire by doing some abdominal hollowing, laying on the floor, but the minute you're standing up, reflexes drive what your core does. A great way to get your core to engage is just stand on one foot. Because when you're balancing the width of your body on something narrow like your foot, you have no choice but to either sway your trunk and do what's inappropriate or use your core and allow your hip and leg to be the dynamic. Now, the core board puts you in many different situations and then tilts, rotates, or moves in some way to make you react or respond. That response is what's going to stimulate the reflex and make you incorporate better movement patterns. Like I said, we've got to clean up the functional movement patterns and then we've got to stabilize those or train those on the core board. Now, in Chapter 8 of Techniques in Musculoskeletal Rehabilitation, Mike Voigt and I laid out a chapter called Reactive Neuromuscular Training, how to teach movement from a reactive base. That's sort of the way you learned it from the beginning. You learn movement through feel. You didn't learn movement through verbal or visual pictures. And it's very important that we set up situations and training sessions where once we've rectified a problem, an athlete can still feel the mistake that they're prone to make by not extending one hip or stabilizing their trunk or elongating their spine. We want to almost push them into the point where they can make the mistake or they correct it. And in correcting it, they successfully complete the movement or the repetition. That's what this core board program is going to do for you, hopefully. Reactive neuromuscular training should have a working definition. Let's give you this now. The use of proprioceptive input to stimulate appropriate, static and dynamic balance and weight shifting reactions to refine the neuromuscular mechanism. Once again, that's a complicated way of saying put them in a situation so they feel the mistake. Don't tell them they made a mistake. Don't show them what the mistake was. Let the mistake speak for itself and let them feel it. That's the only way they can correct it at a neuromuscular level. Minimize your verbal and visual input. Let the board do the work for you. Let the movement teach the movement. Show them how they do it on the uninvolved side or the stronger side, and then show them how their mistakes are on the non-involved side or on the involved side. It's a self-limiting exercise. Hopefully we set these exercises up. Once you watch the video and see them, you'll see that they're self-limiting, meaning if you don't do it right, you can't do it. So the athlete is getting instantaneous feedback on correction without you standing there coaching them through it. That's what we're trying to set up. Now, as you know, we've got the 7 movements, squatting, stepping, lunging, reaching, leg raising, the push-up, and rotational stability. We're going to use 4 basic patterns. The chop and lift are going to be sort of your upper body patterns, and what they are is incorporating 2 PNF patterns of the upper body, D1 and D2 diagonal patterns, working together with the 2 basic foot positions, lunging and squatting. And really lunging and inclusive that scissor stance is your hurdle step as well. So really we're looking at 4 major patterns, chopping and lifting, and then it goes to the right and left side, and then squatting and lunging in floor-based things on the core board to correct this. You've seen squatting. You know how bad it can look. You know how some people don't have the squat. Obviously, you're going to want to do some flexibility work. You're going to want to do some warm-up. And then you're going to want to put them in a situation where the core board gives them feedback as to stability. What we've got here is you bend forward into a forward bend position and load the core board. Make the surface reactive. Let it give you some resistance back. In doing this, you relax the low back. It's almost a reciprocal inhibition thing. You fire the abs, you shut down the low back. And that's one of the major flaws we see going into the squat. Co-contraction. Just like you have to have a quad hamstring ratio, you need to have a ratio between your abs and your back. And a lot of people are predominant with their back. The same people that are usually predominant with their quad and weak on their hamstring are predominant with their spine extension and weak on their abdominals. Well, how do we get those to kick in? How do we relax the back? How do we kick in the abdominals? Bend forward like you can touch your toes, load the board, maintain that load as you drop into the squat. Basically what we're doing is teaching the squat backward. We're dropping you into the squat position and then having you stand up out of it. That's the way you learned it first. You were down on the floor, squatted, and then stood up. You did not drop into the squat. So the way we train it is almost backwards from the way your brain learned it to begin with. It's a neat technique to do, and if you've done the requisite flexibility work first, you'll see a lot of motor learning occur here. The heel lift can also help you in this venue. Hurdle stepping. A lot of people will go ahead, stand on one leg and stride with that leg without activating the core muscles. Putting them in a push-up position, using the reactive surface of the core board helps them do that, lets them see how they don't flex one hip appropriately, or they can flex it even better when they activate the core first. Think of lunging. We've got them now using the board as a torque or rotational component in a striding motion or a mountain climber motion, and you'll see how we develop an exercise progression sequence from that. The reaching has a lot more to do with spinal rotation and scapular stability than it does just glenohumeral internal-external rotation. So what we've done is created almost a warm-up that really gets the upper torso moving. This is important. Your obliques and your transverse abdominis cannot truly react for you if we don't first free up the spinal movements. Think about training a deltoid if you got a frozen shoulder. It's not going to happen. You need to first of all free up the joint movement to allow the muscle spindle reaction, the mechanoreceptor reaction, to let those core reflexes go. So if you go into core training with a stiff spine that doesn't forward bend and doesn't rotate or has asymmetrical rotations, you're going to train your core around that limitation, and we don't want you to do that. So the warm-up is targeted not only to get the spine mobility, but to get that reaching pattern back in. Definitely leg raising. You can see how we use the core board to maintain hip extension and do a leg lift, once again giving feedback specifically in situations where there's a left-right difference or asymmetry. When we do the push-up, we are alternating arm positions to throw sort of a left-right weight shift into the body, and we're either doing that with the feet on the core board or the arms on the core board. You'll see the progression and sequence, how we do that. But we're trying to address push-up problems in the same way. Rotatory stability, we're still using the rotational component, sometimes a lunge stance, sometimes a non-lunge stance to do that, but you'll see how some of these core exercises will basically pick up and rectify some of those rotational stability asymmetries. What you're going to see in the video is a progression. These 4 exercises will help the squat. These 4 exercises will help the lunge. Then what we're going to do for you is also tie those exercises together in a sequence, or what we call like a little routine. They do it in yoga, they do it in Pilates, but basically it's not just performing the individual moves, it's the movement patterns that link one move to the other that really makes motor memory or motor learning occur. So it may seem a little goofy, it may seem a little hard, but this is one of the greatest ways we've ever figured out how to communicate a left-right asymmetry and work through a limitation, because you're working on mobility and stability at the same time, which is the way you use it anyway. Let's go to the video.